arms embargo on Tehran. Can we expect Russia and China to veto any attempts to corner Iran? A full report and analysis is straight ahead. Plus, hundreds of protesters detained in Belarus after disputing last Sunday's elections results are walking away free today, sharing their stories of mistreatment and police brutality. Then, the Justice Department accuses Yale University of discriminating against white and Asian applicants. Today, the Ivy League is responding. We're going to discuss. All right, it's time to boost your news IQ. The UN Security Council is voting today on a resolution submitted by the U.S. that aims to extend the arms embargo on Iran indefinitely. This as Western countries offer aid to Lebanon, which now includes the offer of an FBI investigation into the deadly explosion in the country's capital. RT's Rachel Blevins is joining us now live from the newsroom with more details. So, Rachel, what is the U.S. requesting with its latest UN resolution?
Well, Manila, we have seen tensions between the U.S. and Iran continue to increase over the last 2 years, and now Washington has submitted a long-shot bid to keep the current arms embargo against Iran in place until the Security Council decides otherwise. In a statement, U.S. Ambassador to the UN Kelly Craft said, quote, Iran's actions fuel conflict, chaos, and human suffering on a broad scale. It continues to endanger the lives and livelihoods of millions of innocent men, women, and children by actively supporting proxy groups and terrorist organizations in countries like Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, and Iraq. While Kraft did not address how the U.S. has contributed to the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, the ongoing war in Iraq, or the latest plan to arm proxy groups in Syria, she did claim the United Nations Security Council needs to wake up to the real-world implications of allowing Iran to have access to weapons such as fighter jets, tanks, and warships. As reports have noted, the 13-year-old arms embargo is due to expire in October under a 2015 nuclear deal among Iran, Russia, China, Germany, Britain, France, and the United States that prevents Tehran from developing nuclear weapons in return for sanctions relief. But ever since the Trump administration pulled out of the deal and started implementing sanctions again in 2018, they have campaigned for the UN to push that expiration date back as far as possible. Now, Manila, the 15 members of the UN Security Council have 24 hours to cast their votes virtually on the resolution, and it is expected that Russia and China will use their vetoes to defeat it altogether.
Now, Rachel, another area where the U.S. and Iran are clashing is over Lebanon. So what's the latest on that?
Right. It has been more than a week since the deadly explosion in Lebanon's capital killed nearly 180 people. And already the U.S. and France have sent officials to the country to warn against corruption. Now, Iran's foreign minister also met with his counterpart in Lebanon, and he said he fears Western countries will use the tragic event to push their own agendas.
We believe that Lebanon as people and government are the only side that should decide in this matter. And we also think no one should take advantage of the catastrophic conditions and the dire needs of Lebanon to impose dictates that are in their interests.
Now, the U.S. has also confirmed that the FBI will join the investigation into the explosion, raising questions about whether that Western agenda will bring justice to the thousands of victims and their families. Reporting in the newsroom, Rachel Blevins, RT.
Now, as the Trump administration revels in the newly brokered deal between Israel and the UAE, Palestine has recalled their ambassador to the Emirates, calling this, quote, a blow to the Arab peace initiative. Meanwhile, Brian Hook is out, and convicted Iran-Contra scandal official Elliot Abrams is in as the new special envoy to Iran. This as the UN Security Council is voting to end the arms embargo to the Shiite nation. So for more on this, we'll go to our panel today. Former UK MP George Galloway is joining us, and Scott Ritter. He is a former UN weapons inspector and former Marine Corps intelligence officer. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. So guys, conflict of interest much here? Elliot Abrams has been a long controversial figure here in Washington. Scott, I'll start with you. What's your view on this new position for Elliot Abrams?
Well, he's inheriting a position that was already in chaos. Brian Hook was not qualified for the job he was given. The job was an impossible task to begin with, and Brian Hook failed. He failed because not only of his own shortcomings, but he failed because the United States is seeking a bridge too far when it comes to, trying to punish Iran for crimes that have not been committed. Elliot Abrams is not an expert on the Middle East. He's not an expert on nuclear proliferation. He's little more than an expert on causing chaos and seeking regime change. He did so during his tenure in Central America and in Venezuela, and one can only expect that he'll continue to behave in this manner as he is brought into, as the Iran portfolio is turned over to him. But he'll have the same success rate as Brian Hook, absolutely zero. The United States will not succeed in its policy objectives vis-a-vis Iran, but unfortunately, the Iranian people will continue to suffer under, continued economic sanctions being imposed by the United States.
And George, with Venezuela, yet another Latin American country currently in the crosshairs of Washington, and now the same man who took part in the 80s took part in that dirty arms deal with Iran to fund the rebels in Nicaragua, putting him in charge of relations between Tehran and Washington, I would think seems counterintuitive for a president who campaigned on draining the swamp. Isn't Elliot Abrams a creature of the swamp?
Indeed he is, and it's hard to understand why Donald Trump continues to employ in such sensitive positions such people as Elliot Abrams. The John Bolton example ought to have taught him better. So the Iranian people are not off the hook, if you will pardon the pun, but as Scott Ritter, who knows a thing or two about the real issues in that part of the world, said, this policy is doomed to fail. I have a conflict of interest also. I saw the handiwork of Elliot Abrams and Mr. Negroponte in Central America in the 1980s. I saw the Nicaraguan teachers and health workers with their tongues hanging down their chests like neckties as the fruit of the policy of supporting in every way the gangsters that were the Contras. I saw the attacks on the people who were trying to improve the lives of the people in Central America. With my own eyes, I smelt the death and destruction with my own nostrils. So Elliot Abrams will never be more, neither will John Negroponte, than a gang boss to me, like characters that walked off the set of The Sopranos, but much, much less attractive.
And Scott, over to the UN, they're taking part, or taking a vote rather, on whether or not to let the arms embargo on Iran expire this October. Mike Pompeo says the U.S. will do everything in its power to keep this status quo. Russia and China, who hold permanent seats, will likely veto. So what will be the next move available to the U.S.?
Well, first of all, we need to put this vote in its context. It will not succeed, and the United States knows it will not succeed. What the U.S. is hoping for is enough votes in the Security Council to compel a Russian and or Chinese veto, because then the United States will claim a moral victory that it's seeking to do the right thing, but it was only stopped by the nefarious conduct of Russia and China. But it needs 9 votes to do that, and from what I've read today, it's unlikely the U.S. will get more than 1 vote, that is, its own vote, that there is no support in the Security Council for this. This will then set up the next confrontation, which is about the United States seeking to impose so-called snapback inspections that are part of the Joint Comprehensive Program of Action, which are to be implemented if Iran is found to be in non-compliance. Iran, of course, is not in non-compliance, but the United States is no longer a party to this agreement. But the United States is going to seek to take advantage of bad writing of the agreement to impose its will, which will set up a crisis in the Security Council as the United States seeks to have these sanctions reimposed, and other nations will say you have no right to do this, and it's going to set up the equivalent of a constitutional crisis, so to speak, whether or not the Security Council can prevent a rogue permanent member like the United States from imposing its will. And that's the next big crisis. This vote is a meaningless vote. It's merely setting up the larger confrontation, which will be over the issue of snapback inspections or snapback sanctions.
Yeah, rogue sounds about right. George, as you and I have just discussed, the so-called newly minted, I'm going to call it the Facebook official relationship between the UAE and Israel, have a lot of folks in the Arab world really upset, specifically Palestine. But why? When we know that the Emirates and the Emiratis and the Israelis have long been courting one another behind closed doors. It's just that now they are making their relationship public.
Yes, but I mean, it's a bit like suspecting your husband was having an affair and then having to watch on television him walking down the street hand in hand with his new floozy. It is heartbreaking for the Palestinian people. It's another betrayal on a significant level. Of course, there have been many such betrayals before. Sadat's betrayal at Camp David, then the Jordanian recognition of Israel and its relationship. So the Emirates is not the first and not the most significant, in fact. They're a very long way away from the action. But they once had a leader, Sheikh Zayed, who was a towering Arab and Muslim figure, much revered across the world by Muslims, by almost all Arabs loved Sheikh Zayed. And to see his son betray the Palestinian people in such a public way is bound to cause heartbreak.
And Scott, I will give you the final comment on that matter.
Well, George is absolutely right about the betrayal of the Palestinian people, but I'm going to spin it a different way. This is not a real agreement. This is a con being perpetrated by the Trump administration. It's long on rhetoric, short on details. The United Arab Emirates has said right up off the bat that it will never normalize relations so long as the possibility of annexation on the West Bank takes place. Netanyahu said he's not taking annexation off the table. So there is no agreement. There will be no agreement. This is purely a political ploy by the Trump administration to create the impression of diplomacy in the lead up to the November election, to sell Donald Trump, as a diplomat, as a deal maker. It also buys Netanyahu time. He is facing an existential crisis in Israel with protesters in the street claiming he's doing a horrible job. He has a criminal trial coming up. And the last thing he needed was more controversy brought on by the need to annex, which he had promised to the Israeli people. So by putting this deal on the table, you buy Netanyahu time so that he can navigate one crisis after another before he eventually will have to deal with the issue of annexation. Israel has not walked back on its intentions regarding the annexation of the West Bank. The United Arab Emirates knows this. There will be no deal. This deal will collapse. This is just the UAE basically playing the role of compliant puppy. That's it.
All right, we will see how that shakes out, because as we know, guys, people claim they're in relationships on Facebook all the time, and then their status changes the next day. So we'll see how that goes. Scott Ritter, George Galloway, thank you for joining us today. Other news from around the world, Belarusian authorities have released hundreds of people detained during those protests challenging the results of last Sunday's presidential election. Now today, people were seen walking out of jails in Minsk and in the city of Zhodino. Many of those were visibly emotional. Ambulances arrived to carry those who apparently were unable to walk on their own, and doctors were among those detained. Here's one medic's firsthand account.
The women were lying on the floor, and the men were in the next cell. They were constantly beaten, so badly that they just howled. It was a terrible howl. The blood froze in my veins, just from what we heard every night. It was terrible. The prison guards were saying, "What's wrong? Is your life that bad? Decided to act out a little war here because of some nonsense? What kind of doctors are you? You're not doctors. I don't know what you are. Werewolves." That's the sort of thing they shouted. And a lot of swear words that I don't want to repeat. They were also saying this when we were first held on the street. Everyone driving by was shocked. Doctors in white robes, on their knees with a machine gun to the head.
Wow. Meantime, protesters took to the streets again, calling on their longtime leader, Alexander Lukashenko, to resign. And in Minsk, factory workers rallied to denounce the police crackdowns and are now demanding new elections. And over to the latest COVID-19 numbers worldwide. Cases now almost at 21 million, with about 760,000 reported deaths. The top 3 countries with the most cases, the U.S. still leading that way, followed by Brazil and India. Right here in the U.S., cases topping 5 million with about 167,000 deaths. And in the age of coronavirus, drive-in theaters are again trending. Sony Pictures announced starting today it will begin hosting drive-in movie screenings for the public at their Hollywood studio lot. The screenings will accommodate up to 75 cars. The lineup will include some of the studio's classic films, including The Karate Kid and Ghostbusters. And the DOJ says Yale University discriminated against white and Asian applicants, but the Ivy League school does not agree. We're going to discuss it. Then over in sports, guess who's coming to the Big Apple after all? Regina Ham brings us some exciting news for tennis fans. And to keep up with all the latest news and anything you might have missed, make sure you download the Portable TV app where you can watch us 24/7. We'll be right back. There's growing speculation President Trump could pardon Edward Snowden. In a recent interview with the New York Post, the president said this, quote, "There are a lot of people that think that he is being treated unfairly. I mean, I hear that." On Thursday, the president reportedly polled his own aides about whether he should let Snowden return home from Russia, saying he's open to it. He made those comments to the New York Post while accusing former President Barack Obama of spying on his 2016 campaign. Now, keep in mind, before taking office, Trump tweeted numerous times calling Snowden a traitor and even called for his execution. Still, though, the whistleblower took to his own Twitter to say this, quote, "The last time we heard a White House considering a pardon was 2016, when the very same attorney general who once charged me conceded that, on balance, my work in exposing the NSA's unconstitutional system of mass surveillance had been a public service." And new documents reveal that the U.S. Secret Service looked into surveillance of protesters around the White House with an aircraft and a Black Hawk helicopter. According to the Washington Post, this request was suggested after BLM protesters stormed the area around the White House, prompting agents to rush President Trump to a bunker back in May. Now, the documents suggest that the aircraft provided by the CBP would be used in a rapid response helicopter operation, which included a fast rope commando team. And after a 2-year investigation, the DOJ is accusing Yale University of discriminating against Asian and white students during the freshman application process and formally ordered the Ivy League school to halt this practice for at least 1 year. Now, Yale vows to fight the Justice Department and continue with their existing practices for admissions, citing that race or ethnic heritage is just one of hundreds of data points used to evaluate applicants. Now, this comes just 1 month before arguments are set to be heard in the appeals case challenging Harvard's admission process in a similar case brought by Asian American civil rights groups. So here to break it all down, attorney and media analyst, our friend Lionel of Lionel Media. All right, Lionel, why isn't this case a case of affirmative action?
It is. Well, that's what we used to call it. Manila, affirmative action, the term was first used in 1961 by President Kennedy in an executive order as to hiring. But it has taken more euphemistic twists and turns to quotas, and that was considered no good. And then various considerations in the a determination to balance out the mixtures of fundamental backgrounds, and it's affirmative action. It's exactly what it is.
Right. And can you compare for us and perhaps contrast today's current climate with that of the 1978 Bakke-Scotus case?
Right. Bakke was the case. This was a medical student who was denied because there was a series of placements of positions for enrollees based upon minority status, and that gave rise to quotas. You can't have a quota. So what did they do? They said, fine, we won't have a quota. And then in other cases, we'll just have a series of points, factors, determinations, not a quota, mind you. It's just like when you ask the police, is there a quota for speeding tickets? Of course not. But if we don't charge anybody for speeding, we lose our job. So there is a quota, but we don't call it a quota.
I hear you. That's a wink, wink, elbow. Lionel,
Yes,
what does this mean then in terms of academic meritocracy? You remember that word, something the founders thought we should use for this country? Shouldn't things be gauged on, who gets the best scores, the best grades, irrespective of race?
This is the part that most people intuitively don't understand. Yes, you can have and should have a diversity of people on your campus, in your classes. Yes, but this is an institution that has a rigorous application process with SATs and letters of recommendation, people who basically spend their entire lifetime trying to get in with extracurricular activities and president of the student council, all these factors. But what happens is race is fixed. You are of a particular race, at birth. Perhaps it might be considered fluid one day, but
sure,
that's another issue. So there's something that bothers people. You can say, look, I understand this, but why don't you pick this? Why don't you take of everybody with a 4.0, a GPA, and this SAT? Then perhaps look for diversity. What always is suspected here is that when you look at the numbers, when you say that out of 1,000 Asian Americans or Asians who applied, none were selected, sometimes when the numbers are so egregious, you can't help but say there is a systematic exclusion quota that's being applied here. And the thing is, Manila, we always say, what if we applied this non-meritocracy-based analysis to sports?
Yes.
Would you want to go see a diverse basketball team, a diverse football team? We say, we're losing. Yes, but they're so diverse. And while it's, I don't mean to mock it, but you always have to ask, there are certain aspects of criteria that you would think are absolute. GPA,
yes,
SATs, et cetera, et cetera. There are other factors, experience and the like. But Manila, this is a case, this is a situation that has not changed since Bakke in '78, and it's been seen in the military, it's been seen in every walk of life. And now, Asians, which years ago there was a time when people said Asians had a disproportionate, a favorable status, that there were more Asians in the sciences. This is what we're said. People said that was a quota. The irony of such is now it seems that that's not the case. So you have people who were perhaps incorrectly viewed as being preferred now are leading the charge, saying, now we're the basis of this. So it's a fascinating issue.
Yeah, it just seems like, can't you just correct it without overcorrecting? I mean, that's kind of where we're at.
What about this? What about this? Just have no part of the application for sex or ethnicity, and just say, I don't know what you look like, but that's a great score. I'll take him, her, they, whatever.
Right.
That's the one I want.
I'm with you. I'm with you on that, Lionel. We got to leave right there, my friend. Lionel of Lionel Media. Always appreciate your legal expertise. Thank you. All right, let's hop over to the world of sports with Regina Ham. Regina, we're finally finding out who will be attending the U.S. Open in the coming weeks.
It's quite the list, and usually the fourth Grand Slam on the calendar. The U.S. Open is scheduled to happen as planned in just 17 days. While some notable names like current reigning women's champion Bianca Andreescu and reigning men's champion Rafael Nadal will be sitting on the sidelines, one big name decided he's all in. ATP World #1 Novak Djokovic announced he will be participating in this year's COVID-modified event. That means at least one of the big three in men's tennis will be represented, as Roger Federer is also out after 2 operations to his right knee. There was speculation that Djokovic wouldn't participate after he criticized the U.S. Open for their bubble protocols, calling them extreme. The 17-time men's Grand Slam champion was subject to criticism in June when his Adria Tour exhibition event was canceled after several players, including himself, tested positive for COVID-19. Novak will be joined by 23-time Grand Slam champion Serena Williams as some of the marquee names at the tournament. Both are also on the roster for the Western and Southern Open, which will be held the week before the U.S. Open in Flushing Meadows. So we're going to get some great tennis action coming up, Manila, but it will be drastically different looking than in years prior.
Well, at least for the players in this sport, at least we know they can socially distance.
Yeah, if you're not, there's a problem.
Yes, you're playing probably a little too close to the net. All right, thank you for that, Regina. And that's going to do it for us for right now. But make sure you keep up with everything in question at all times by downloading the Portable TV app, where you can watch this show 24/7 in full. Make sure you follow me on Twitter or Instagram @Manila Chan. I will see you soon. Thanks for watching.